Last week, the State Comptroller's Office released the results of a fiscal stress monitoring system. According to the State Comptroller, Tom DiNapoli, 87 school districts in the state have been designated as fiscally stressed. The State Association of School Business Officials would like to see that plan that they introduced in 2012, which requires an early warning system followed by subsequent intervention. They do not disagree that schools are in trouble, just the question is exactly how much. Joining me now to go over this, we have Assistant Comptroller Natalie Carey and also Michael Borges, the Executive Director of the Association of School Business Officials. Everyone in the studio, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I guess let's start with this. Not everybody might know. What is the definition of fiscally stressed?
So right now, the Comptroller's Office has 3 categories of stress. So they're significant, moderate, and susceptible to stress. And essentially what we're saying here is that these are the school districts, and we also did a release for municipalities, but in this case, as we're talking about school districts, these are the school districts that we find we need to monitor and to closely watch, because they're getting to a point where their finances are showing that they're showing some levels of financial strain.
How far away from are they from insolvency if they're on this list?
And we're not, again, we tend to not be alarmists. So we're not saying that the cliff is, they're approaching the cliff tomorrow. There are decisions that are being made in school districts and local governments today that could be moving them further away from these categories or closer to, in some cases, these categories. So one of the things that our system does not do is that it does not have the ability to judge the management of the schools. Essentially, we're using data that is a year old, so there are decisions, as I'm saying, that are being made today that could be having an impact on their financial condition and could be helping improve them. So essentially what we're trying to say is that based on the information that we have seen, these are school districts that need to be a little bit careful about the decisions that they're making, and hopefully they're using it to make better decisions.
Okay, so Michael, first of all, I would assume if a district appears on said list, it's probably not terribly surprised. I mean, these districts are aware of what their situation is. Your assertion is that it's actually worse than 87?
Yes, I mean, as you mentioned, we called for this in a report that we released in September of 2012 for an early warning system. Because sometimes when budget decisions are being made, school administrators, school boards don't realize the long-term ramifications of their decisions. So we want to alert people that, if there's a problem, it's going to have long-term ramifications. And an early warning system kind of, raises the red flag and saying, hey, the course of action that you're on now could lead to further financial problems down the road and educational problems as well, because they're tied together. And that's what our report, we're going to actually release another report next week that talks about fiscal as well as educational insolvency and how the two are tied together, because they are tied together. If your school district is suffering financially, it's also going to be suffering educationally.
Okay, can a school district go bankrupt?
No.
Legally, no, right?
Right.
Okay, so when we're monitoring these school districts, what are we doing for them?
Really what we're doing for them is making sure that they're aware of some of the issues that they have. And essentially, it's not just about the school districts, it's also making sure we inform the public. The discussion about fiscal stress, this isn't a new discussion, this isn't a new topic for the State Comptroller's Office, but it is a new way of looking at it. We're actually using empirical data that we've collected over years and making it something that's actually digestible to the public so that they can understand, here's how my school stands and ranks and compared to all of the other schools or compared to schools in my region or like schools as well. That's not something that has been done before. We've been kind of talking about fiscal stress in this kind of nebulous terms. Now we're actually trying to make the rubber hit the road so that everyone understands where these school districts stand comparative to each other.
But when it comes to fixing the problem, that's the school district's responsibility, not the State Comptroller's responsibility.
It's not our responsibility.
But you say that you would like to see more of an assist or a plan?
Yeah, well, I think it would be helpful if State Comptroller or others, assist school districts with identifying issues that they may be having that are causing the fiscal stress. In an analogy I made before, it's about a fireman going to your house and telling your house is on fire, but then walking away without providing any assistance in putting out the fire. So what we want is to see that either the State Comptroller, the legislature, or other policymakers help school districts, once we've been identified as fiscally in stress, that there are some solutions put forward. So
But in that,
yeah.
I
Go
would
ahead.
just say in that analogy though, Mike, we know that when there's a fire, that one way to alleviate that is by using the hose that the fireman is equipped with to relieve that fire. We don't necessarily have a hose. We don't have a magic bullet that's going to say, this is the way you're going to solve the problem, because all of these school districts are unique. Each region is unique, each local government is unique, and it is difficult for the state to come in and say, here's a magic solution to those problems. But I think that we agree with Mike and we agree with ASBO in the terms that we want to make sure that they're aware that these problems exist, one, and not just the schools, but the public and the state lawmakers, so that they understand it, and also they start having those discussions, as Mike is saying, about what can we do to help.
Okay, so this may be a piece of the conversation that you might not be able to weigh in on, because the state comptroller has a responsibility to review the budget, and the state comptroller did put out some preliminary remarks on the governor's proposal, and of course there's no agreement yet with the legislature, because that will happen by, we hope, the mandated date of April 1st. But you think that perhaps there might be more trouble, in other words, under what the governor has proposed, despite the fact that there's a 3.8% increase in public aid for education for schools, that this could force more schools onto the fiscal stress list.
Yeah, I mean, there are two things coming together here. First is it's the tax cap.
Right.
Last year, the tax cap was at 2%. This year, with the new information that we're coming out from the CPI, the cap is 1.46. So first off the bat is school districts will be able to raise less money than they did last year from local resources. Secondly, the governor's proposal in his executive budget is basically the status quo. There really is no increase in state aid for schools. That $807 million really is broken down really to $600 million in terms of GEA restoration. So they're restoring money that was previously cut. And then the bulk of the other money is basically expense-based aid. So aid that goes to school districts to pay for expenses that they incurred in the previous year. That's for like transportation, for building, for BOCES services. So there really is no new aid in the state budget for school operating expenses.
So is the comptroller's office idea that if in fact there were to be a solution to have more hoses, for lack of a better term, that it would be the legislature's responsibility to come up with that hose plan?
Well, I mean, that's a part of their responsibility. The comptroller's office does not have the ability to pass the legislation or to deal with that matter in that particular way. But what we can do is inform the discussion, and I think that that is what we've been trying to do all along.
So is there something specific that you want the legislature to do to assist these particular schools?
Well, again,
besides add money. Don't say add money, because I know you want more money.
Well,
so don't tell me that.
I mean, I think there's a commitment to fund schools properly so that kids can graduate college and career ready. But absent of that, there are also a lot of suggestions for mandate relief. So if what the governor is proposing in the executive budget is continuing to cap our revenues, and actually the comptroller's office, again, which I want to commend, pointed out that the fact of all the stress that's happening to schools from the tax cap, from reduced aid, and et cetera, et cetera. So, they're pointing us in the right direction. But the problem is that in the executive budget, there are no mandate relief. They're not reducing our expenses. They're reducing our revenue, or they're capping our revenue, but they're not capping our expenses.
Well, in fact,
and that's what's missing from this
there's
whole
actually an incentive built into the governor's plan to get districts and local governments to stay under that cap.
Yes, under the cap, which means they're reducing or capping our revenue.
Right.
They're not capping our expenses.
No.
That's a difference. There's a difference there.
So, okay, so this is an annual review, is that correct? So it's just been done. Yours is coming out in?
Next week.
Okay, can you tell us?
Well, I mean, it paints it's a more comprehensive picture because we take a look at 3-year averages, whereas the controller's report only looks at a snapshot of 1 year, I believe, in terms of fund balances. We also take a look at staffing levels over the last 3 years as well. And so staffing, corresponds to educational insolvency. Fund balances really point the picture towards fiscal insolvency, and we put the two together, and it paints a much more comprehensive and unfortunately dire picture than what's come out before.
Okay, so we'll have you back
Yes.
to have a chat about that, and then you can come back too if you want, but it'll be a year from now. But it's been great having you both. I appreciate your time. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank
We
you
do
so
need
much.